What happens when the last door to peace slams shut? When do the phone lines between capitals go silent? When the language of diplomacy is replaced by the language of fire and steel? Right now, in the corridors of power from Tehran to Washington, that silence is deafening. Iran has just issued a statement that has sent shockwaves through the international community. They have rejected ceasefire talks. They have declared that while strikes continue, there will be no negotiations. And they have invoked a phrase that history remembers all too well: eye for an eye. This is not a bluff. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is a formal declaration of strategic intent from a nation with the capability to reshape the Middle East overnight. Welcome to Power Clash Report. Today, we are breaking down one of the most critical developments in the ongoing Iran-Israel conflict. We are moving beyond the headlines to understand the doctrine, the strategy, and the terrifying reality of what happens when diplomacy fails. We will examine the official statements from Tehran. We will analyze the U.S.-Israel military posture. We will explore the role of regional proxies. And we will answer the question that matters most. Is this the point of no return? Stay with me until the end, because understanding this shift is not just about geopolitics. It is about the stability of the global economy, the safety of millions of civilians, and the future of international order. Let us begin with the facts. On March 9, 2026, following a week of intensified airstrikes by Israeli and United States forces on Iranian military and energy infrastructure, the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a formal communiqué. The statement was brief, but its implications were massive. It declared that Iran would not engage in any ceasefire negotiations mediated by Oman, Qatar, or the United Nations, while foreign military operations on Iranian soil continued. The key phrase used by Iranian officials was reciprocal response. In Persian diplomatic language, this is often coded as eye for an eye. It signals a shift from strategic patience to immediate proportional retaliation. According to reports from Reuters and Al Jazeera, Iranian diplomats privately informed mediators that any proposal for de-escalation must begin with a complete halt to airstrikes. Until then, they stated, the cycle of action and reaction will continue. This is a significant departure from previous conflicts, where back-channel negotiations often ran parallel to military exchanges. In the past, even during heightened tensions, there were quiet lines of communication in Geneva or Muscat, designed to prevent accidental escalation. Those lines, according to multiple diplomatic sources, are now inactive. The statement also addressed the recent strikes on oil depots near Tehran. Iranian officials characterized these attacks not as military operations, but as economic terrorism aimed at civilian infrastructure. By framing the strikes this way, Iran is building a legal and moral case for broader retaliation. They are signaling that if energy infrastructure is a target, then regional energy flows could become a weapon. This is not just rhetoric. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil supply passes. Any threat to that choke point is a threat to the global economy. Furthermore, the statement emphasized national sovereignty. It argued that accepting a ceasefire while under attack would be seen as capitulation by the Iranian public. Domestic politics play a crucial role here. The Iranian leadership faces pressure to demonstrate strength. A ceasefire without concessions could be perceived as weakness. Therefore, the rejection of talks is both a strategic move and a domestic necessity. It locks the leadership into a path of escalation. Once you publicly reject peace, accepting it later becomes politically costly. This creates a dangerous momentum where military action becomes the only visible option. We must also consider the timing. This statement came just hours after the United Nations Security Council held an emergency session. The Secretary General warned of a wider regional conflict. Yet within hours of that warning, Iran's response was definitive. This suggests that diplomatic efforts at the UN level were either ignored or deemed insufficient by Tehran. It indicates a loss of faith in international institutions to provide security or justice. When nations stop believing in diplomacy, they turn to force. And that is the threshold we are crossing now. To understand the gravity of this rejection, we need to understand the doctrine behind it. What does eye for an eye mean in the context of modern Iranian military strategy? It is not just a slogan, it is a calculated framework for retaliation. In previous conflicts, Iran often relied on strategic patience. They would absorb a strike, wait for weeks or months, and then respond through proxy groups in Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon. This allowed for plausible deniability and reduced the risk of direct war. However, recent developments suggest a shift in this doctrine. The eye for an eye statement implies immediacy and directness. It suggests that future responses may not wait for opportune moments. They may be synchronized with incoming attacks. This changes the risk calculus for Israel and the United States. If every strike is met with an immediate counterstrike, the window for de-escalation closes rapidly. There is no time for diplomats to intervene between exchanges. The conflict becomes automated, driven by military timelines rather than political ones. This doctrine also expands the target set. Previously, Iran often targeted military bases or unmanned installations to avoid casualties. An eye for an eye approach could justify targeting equivalent infrastructure. If oil depots in Iran are struck, Iranian strategists may argue that energy infrastructure in the region is now a valid target. This could include facilities in allied nations. It creates a web of vulnerability where economic assets become military objectives. This is the definition of total war logic applied to modern infrastructure. Moreover, this doctrine leverages Iran's asymmetric capabilities. Iran may not have the same air force as Israel or the US, but it has thousands of ballistic missiles and a network of proxy militias. An eye for an eye strategy could involve coordinated missile barrages from Iranian territory combined with drone attacks from Hezbollah in Lebanon or Houthis in Yemen. This multi-front approach stretches defense systems thin. It forces adversaries to defend everywhere at once. In military theory, this is called saturation. And saturation is designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. We must also consider the psychological aspect. Doctrine is not just about weapons, it is about perception. By publicly stating this stance, Iran is signaling resolve to its own population and its allies. It tells Hezbollah and other groups that the time for restraint is over. This mobilizes the entire axis of resistance. It transforms a bilateral conflict into a regional coalition effort. This increases the manpower and resources available for sustained conflict. It also increases the risk of miscalculation. When multiple actors are empowered to strike, coordination becomes difficult. One rogue launch could trigger a cascade of responses that no central command intended. Historical precedents offer grim warnings. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, tit-for-tat escalations led to the targeting of civilian cities and oil tankers. The conflict lasted 8 years and cost millions of lives. While the technology has changed, the human dynamics remain the same. Once the principle of reciprocity takes hold, finding an off-ramp becomes exponentially harder. Each side feels compelled to match the other's intensity. Moderation is seen as a weakness. This is the trap of the eye for an eye doctrine. It creates a logical path to mutual destruction. On the other side of this equation, why are the United States and Israel continuing strikes despite the rejection of ceasefire talks? Their stated objectives focus on degradation and deterrence. According to Pentagon briefings, the goal is to degrade Iran's ability to project power and produce advanced weaponry. They argue that pauses in operations would allow Iran to rebuild capabilities and rearm proxy groups. From this perspective, continuity is essential to achieve military objectives. Israel's position is similarly focused on long-term security. Israeli officials have stated that they cannot accept a neighbor with the capability to threaten their existence. They view the current strikes as preemptive self-defense. By targeting energy and military infrastructure, they aim to raise the cost of aggression for Tehran. The logic is that if Iran suffers enough economic pain, it will be forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. This is a strategy of coercion. It is believed that pressure will eventually break the adversary's will. However, this strategy carries significant risks. History shows that coercive bombing campaigns often harden resolve rather than break it. The Blitz in London, the bombing of Hanoi, the sanctions on Iraq, none of these achieved their political goals through force alone. Instead, they often unified populations against the attacker. In Iran, external pressure could strengthen the hardline factions who argue that compromise is impossible. It could marginalize moderates who advocate for diplomacy. This creates a paradox where military success leads to political failure. There is also the question of alliance management. The United States is balancing support for Israel with the desire to avoid a regional war. Continued strikes strain this balance. Arab partners in the Gulf are concerned about being dragged into the conflict. They host U.S. military bases, but rely on trade with Iran. They want stability, not escalation. If U.S. strikes continue unchecked, these partners may distance themselves, reducing U.S. influence in the region. This complicates the strategic picture. Victory is not just about damaging the enemy. It is about maintaining the coalition that makes victory possible. Furthermore, there is the risk of unintended escalation. Every missile launched carries the possibility of miscalculation. A stray rocket hits a populated area. A civilian aircraft was misidentified as a threat. A cyber attack that spirals beyond control. In a tense environment, small errors can trigger large consequences. The US and Israel have superior technology, but technology cannot eliminate human error or the fog of war. And when nuclear-capable states are involved, the margin for error shrinks to zero. This is why many analysts view the current trajectory with deep concern. The combination of rejected diplomacy, escalating strikes, and hardened doctrines creates a perfect storm for unintended conflict. Now, let us examine the role of regional proxies in this equation. Iran does not fight alone. It has cultivated a network of allied militias across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon possesses an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles. Houthi forces in Yemen have demonstrated the ability to strike deep into Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Shia militias in Iraq have targeted U.S. bases repeatedly. These groups are not mere puppets. They have their own agendas and capabilities, but they coordinate with Tehran. If Iran activates this network in response to continued strikes, the conflict could expand from bilateral exchanges to a regional conflagration. Imagine simultaneous rocket fire from Lebanon, drone attacks from Yemen, and missile launches from Iran. This is not speculation. It is a scenario that war games have simulated repeatedly. The question is not whether Iran has this capability. The question is whether they will use it. The eye for an eye doctrine suggests they might. By rejecting ceasefire talks, Iran signals that it is prepared to absorb costs and escalate in return. This changes the calculation for Israel and the United States. They must now consider not just Iran's direct response, but the multiplied effect of proxy activation. Defending against one front is challenging. Defending against 4 or 5 simultaneously may be impossible without significant collateral damage. This is the asymmetric advantage that Iran leverages. It does not need to win a conventional war. It only needs to make the cost of victory too high to bear. And that is a strategy that has worked for weaker powers throughout history. Let us talk about the human dimension. Behind every strategic calculation are real people. In Iran, civilians are living under the threat of airstrikes. In Israel, families are sheltering from rocket fire. In Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq, communities are caught in the crossfire of a conflict they did not choose. The rejection of ceasefire talks means that this suffering will continue. It means that hospitals, schools, and homes remain at risk. It means that children grow up knowing the sound of sirens more than the sound of laughter. This is the hidden cost of escalation. It is measured not in territory gained or weapons destroyed, but in lives altered and futures diminished. As we analyze the geopolitics, we must not lose sight of this reality. Strategy without humanity is not strategy. It is cruelty dressed in calculation. There is also the economic dimension to consider. The Middle East is the engine of global energy supply. Any disruption to oil flows affects prices worldwide. When Iran threatens the Strait of Hormuz or when attacks target energy infrastructure, markets react instantly. Brent crude prices have already shown volatility in response to recent developments. If the conflict escalates further, we could see sustained price spikes. This affects everything from the cost of gasoline at the pump to the price of food on your table. Inflation, which many economies are still recovering from, could reignite. Central banks may delay interest rate cuts. Stock markets may tumble. This is how a diplomatic breakdown in the Middle East impacts your wallet, your job, and your financial security thousands of miles away. Energy security is national security, and national security is personal security. Now, let us address the question many of you are asking. Is there still a path to de-escalation? The honest answer is yes, but the window is narrowing. Diplomacy requires 2 willing parties. If one side rejects talks, the other cannot force engagement. However, history shows that even bitter enemies can find their way to the negotiating table when the costs of conflict become unbearable. The key is creating conditions where dialogue appears more attractive than escalation. This may require third-party mediation, confidence-building measures, or face-saving compromises. It may require acknowledging legitimate security concerns on all sides. It certainly requires patience and political courage. These are in short supply right now, but they are not extinct. The role of the international community is to keep the flame of diplomacy alive, even when it flickers. What can you do as an informed citizen? First, stay informed through credible sources. Follow official statements from governments and international organizations. Be skeptical of sensational claims on social media. Second, understand the broader context. This is not an isolated event. It is part of a shifting landscape of global power where regional conflicts have worldwide consequences. Third, engage constructively. Share verified information. Support humanitarian efforts for those affected by conflict. Advocate for a peaceful resolution through your elected representatives. At Power Clash Report, we believe that knowledge is power. Understanding geopolitical events helps us make better decisions, protect our families, and contribute to a more stable world. We are committed to providing analysis that is thorough, balanced, and grounded in facts. We will continue to monitor this developing situation and bring you updates as verified information emerges. Before we conclude, let us recap the key points. Iran has formally rejected ceasefire talks while strikes continue, invoking an eye for an eye doctrine of immediate, proportional retaliation. This represents a shift from strategic patience to direct response, expanding potential targets and accelerating escalation timelines. The U.S. and Israel continue strikes to degrade Iranian capabilities and deter future aggression, but this strategy risks hardening Iranian resolve and alienating regional allies. Iran's network of proxy militias could transform a bilateral conflict into a regional war, leveraging asymmetric capabilities to offset conventional disadvantages. The human and economic costs of continued escalation are substantial, affecting civilians across the Middle East and global markets worldwide. While the path to de-escalation remains narrow, it is not closed. Diplomacy requires patience, courage, and a willingness to acknowledge mutual security concerns. The choice before the world's leaders is stark. They can continue down the path of escalation, betting that military pressure will eventually force concessions, or they can find the wisdom to reopen diplomatic channels, recognizing that lasting security comes not from defeating an enemy, but from building a stable order where conflict is less likely. History will judge this moment not by the weapons fired, but by the peace forged or lost. As citizens of an interconnected world, we have both the right and the responsibility to demand that our leaders choose wisdom over whim, dialogue over destruction, and hope over fear. If this analysis provided value, please like this video, subscribe to Power Clash Report, and share it with someone who needs to understand these developments. Turn on notifications so you do not miss our updates as this story evolves. In the description below, you will find links to credible sources, official statements, and further reading on this topic. We are committed to bringing you signal in a world of noise. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay safe. And remember, in a world of increasing uncertainty, clarity is the most valuable asset we have.